Banggood sent me over this Emax TinyHawk Freestyle to do the review and all that. I know there was a glut of reviews about this guy, you know, a month or two back, maybe 3, and I didn't want to just do a first impressions view because I had a lot of first impressions and some of them were actually wrong, which I will come back to. What we don't often see is what's it like spending a month with the thing. And that's what I've done. I've flown the heck out of this thing over the last month. Over a dozen flying sessions. I've crashed it, I've modified it, I've done all kinds of things, and really I've fallen in love with it. It's actually awesome. I can wholeheartedly get behind recommending this thing, which is great, because some of the other things I've had a lot of reservations about. Things like the Sailfly X, there's stuff that I love, but I can't really recommend it because it's just too darn delicate. I'll show you some of the small mods that I've done. I've added this DVR, tweaked, you know, I think this is a great place for the RX antenna and some other little 3D printed parts that I've made and that kind of thing. First off, I'm just going to talk about the actual flight and what I think it's great for, and I really do think it's great. I dig it. And I'll roll some flight footage whilst we're at it, and we'll go from there. And first off, I have to talk about why I love this class of quad, right? It's basically a toothpick quad. It doesn't have the bi-blades, but it's the same idea. It's 80-ish grams of weight, and it's a 2S battery. What I love about this thing is you get pretty great performance, but it's quiet. This is even quieter than my bi-blade toothpicks. These props, despite looking like something that was designed by an evil villain, are actually super quiet, which is fantastic. I love that I can take this thing to a park. I can go and grab a 20-minute flying session before work, after work, in my lunch break. That's what these toothpick style things are all about. You can just have an opportunity to fly, and no one is scared of them. They don't make a great big angry noise, and people are actually more interested in seeing what you're up to than, you know, yelling at you for flying in a park. As far as flight performance goes, I make no claims to being an expert pilot. I'm sort of a intermediate, one might even say beginner, depending on the day. But this thing has a lot of room to grow, but I think it's also pretty great for a fairly new pilot. It's quite robust. The performance is awesome. You could run the 1S option if you like, but I think just being careful on 2S is probably more sensible. One of my first concerns with this thing after my experiences with the Sailfly X was that I was going to break the carbon immediately, but jeepers, I have crashed the heck out of this thing. It's probably an appropriate time to roll a series of crashes. I was also concerned that the motors being non-standard motor spacing, or the FC, everything's kind of a little bit unusual, would be a problem because I'd be breaking it, but so far I haven't broken anything. Obviously I will eventually, but it is actually possible to replace everything with regular kind of components. It'll just take a little bit of thinking. Few small changes that I made right off the bat, not really changes, but the RX antenna is just dangling, so I put a zip tie here and put some heat shrink on it, and I've actually had no problems with RX signal, which is surprising because these onboard ones are usually not great. The VTX is not so hot and the camera is not so hot, but it's perfectly usable. One of my initial concerns was this VTX antenna placement. I really thought it's a weird, and I still do think it's weird, that it tilts forwards like this, like it's going to get ripped off on things. But it hasn't happened so far, and I've crashed into many things. I do find that this thing tilts over a bit here, so I actually just use a rubber band to hold it in place. And that keeps it nice and vertical. another small change I've made is to install an XT30 connector on the back, and I've actually kept the original two 1S batteries, and I'll show you what I've done with that little inverter board at the end of the video if you're interested, so that you can keep running 1Ss in 2S configuration, but you don't need it all the time, because I think most of us are going to run 2S like this, so let's just make that the default. I've done all of my flying so far with either the original 450 milliamp batteries in series, well, in series as a 2S, or these GNB 520 milliamp 2Ss, which are also pretty decent and get you quite nice fly time. So the top mounted battery is quite great. I actually like it. I thought it was a bit weird at first, but it makes a whole lot of sense. Flight performance wise, who knows if it's really better or not, but what I like about it is that you can land the quad and the props don't get stuck in grass and stuff, which is fantastic. Major annoyance though was that the battery kept getting the wires, you had to watch out, and I was using an elastic band to keep them from getting into the props, which works just fine, but it's annoying. So I designed this 3D printed little clip here. I've printed mine out of nylon. You could get away with other things. I'll put that link up in the description as well if you want to print it, but it's a nice neat solution. It worked great for me. I recommend adding a little zip tie here to this capacitor. Although it's pretty well protected, I did end up bending mine in a crash. Unfortunately didn't rip it off, and it would be pretty awful if you did, because it might short out. So a little zip tie there just keeps things safe and secure. Obviously one of the biggest additions that I've made here is this little HM DVR, which is a nice all-in-one DVR unit which you can put in there. You can choose to put it in line with the VTX or straight out of the camera so that you get the OSD or not. I don't like the OSD on my footage. And this just results in clear footage. Unfortunately, it also highlights the inadequacies of this camera, but that's alright. It's still better than goggle DVR. So if you're interested in installing one of those, I'll put the nitty-gritty of that towards the end of the video as well. Here you can see the DVR is ready to record, and then you just hit the button, starts blinking. As soon as the DVR starts blinking, it's recording, and that's it. All of the footage you see in this video has been recorded on this DVR with a stock camera. The only major annoyance about this DVR is that you have to remember to push the stop button in order for the video to be saved. Just remove the cover. But that's the spot for the SD card. SD card just pops in here. Nice little press fit. I recommend putting a bit of tape on there to keep it from flying out in crashes. And then all you have to do is connect these wires up. They're actually shown on here what they are, which helps. You can see you've got your 5 volts on the red, ground on the black, and then video on the blue. Obviously you could connect this to the point where it goes into your VTX if you want to keep the on-screen display, or I prefer not to have any of that garbage, and I just make sure that I connect it directly to the output of the camera. And this basically sits in parallel with your VTX. Alright, there's the top plate off. There's its guts. Looks like this camera's got nice pads on the back here. Should make it easy to solder onto. Tin the ends, the leads here. Make use of these handy pads. We've got the video out from the camera going to the VTX on the yellow wire and the DVR on the blue wire, and then the power to the DVR and into the camera from the regulators. We do get a little bag of goodies as well, an XT30. There's that loopback connector for running a single cell, some screws for props, and a little bit of heat shrink and all sorts of stuff. So that's rather nice. What I'm going to do is I'm going to chop this connector off and put on an XT30, but I'm going to use this connector that they've provided, and I'm going to attach that to this board so that I have a little adapter and I can continue to use the single cells that were provided with it It'll be a tiny weight penalty, but it really shouldn't be a big deal. And then I'll still be able to charge those single cells in the supplied charger. Just going to trim off some of this heat shrink, just enough to get to those solder blobs there. Now you can see the markings on here. If we can get a focus, and you can actually see the positive and negative there. I'm going to go ahead and put a little solder in these cups. I'm going to rotate these cups so that they are flat in this direction. There we are, full voltage of 2 cells. Obviously on the quad itself we need another matching XT30. Always remember your heat shrink first, and we'll put this one on there, of course. I have to wonder if they designed this thing to look like a stormtrooper for the old joke that stormtroopers never hit anything. But there's a good bet that I will prove that wrong very soon. I should probably get a heat gun for this. So let's plug our thing in, right? There we are. Beeps and no fire. That's what I call a success.